Hi everyone here and around the whole world. Since last week's broadcast, we have broken through 199,000 subscribers. Oh, I thank all of you so much. And it won't be long before we break through the 200,000 mark, and I'm working on some ways to celebrate, and you can help me get there. So if you haven't subscribed, which does not cost you anything, but it helps Earthfiles at YouTube, please click on that red subscribe arrow on your screen to help Earthfiles keep going and going to 200,000 and beyond. And click the like button too. Meanwhile, reports of strange lights in the sky seem to be increasing around the world, and an interesting one that I received with 6 minutes of video was only a few miles from me here in Albuquerque last Friday night, February 18th. I received an email from Marcy Brandenburg, a realtor in Rio Rancho. She and her partner, David Bartley, like to stargaze in the clear, dry New Mexico air, and around 9:30 p.m. last Friday night, they were outside. Marcy had her cell phone with her, and when they saw some movement in the sky looking north towards Santa Fe, Marcy began to record on her phone. She and David did not understand what they were seeing in the sky. And aware of my Earthfiles YouTube channel, Marcy emailed me and followed up by sending 6 minutes of her videos through Dropbox. I also talked with professional Albuquerque drone operator Steve Winter after he had seen the videos as well. Could the strange light activity be drones? I asked. He told me it is illegal to operate drones a half hour after sunset or a half hour before sunrise without a special waiver. This light sequence began near 9:30 p.m. Mountain, long after sunset. He told me he was, quote, definitely puzzled by the assortment of changing lights so far away towards Santa Fe. To concentrate on the high strangeness of the light patterns, I have taken out the black sky lulls in between the lights, but the changing time code will show you the accurate pacing of the unexplained light activity from the original video recordings. This light sequence began near 9:30 p.m. Mountain, long after sunset on February 18th. And Steve told me he was, quote, definitely puzzled by the assortment of changing lights so far away towards Santa Fe. If any of you have any possibly factual information or insights about what these light patterns could be that are not generated by drones according to professional drone operators, please email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. Just always think about a reporter who files news about the Earth. Last week, in a search of various UFO types through the decades, I also found this black and white photograph of a sombrero-shaped UFO from the 1960s. It's very similar to a sketch that Terry Peck in Melbourne, Australia, made of the UFO that she saw land near her Westall High School in the Clayton suburb of Melbourne, Australia on April 6, 1966. Her classmate, Joy Clarke, also sketched the UFO that she saw near the Westall High School. And after working with remote viewer and astral projector Buddy Bolton last week about the differences between the tall whites and the Nordic extraterrestrial biological humanoids, I wondered if Buddy could perceive which non-human type was in this old 1960s black and white photo that resembles the sketches by Terry Peck and Joy Clarke from their school encounter on April 6th of 1966. Westall High School is now Westall Secondary College in the Melbourne suburb of Clayton, about 16 miles southeast of Melbourne's Town Hall. It was near 10:20 a.m. that morning when some 200 students and teachers ran to see the UFO, or UFOs, plural. That afternoon, Melbourne's Channel 9 TV station sent a reporter to interview eyewitnesses. 12-year-old Joy Clarke and many other students, along with their science teacher, Mr. Greenwood, plus several others, described for the TV news camera a round UFO disc that moved fast and erratically in the sky, along with two other round craft that kept appearing and disappearing as all three discs changed from horizontal to vertical. These three UFO discs in this very old photo are not Westall, but they illustrate the vertical position that the Westall students saw happen over and over, and it amazed them from horizontal to vertical to horizontal to vertical. Eventually, the slightly larger round craft lowered behind a grove of trees near the school, where several circles of tall grass were found pressed to the ground. 12-year-old Joy Clarke was photographed in front of one of the grass circles. She saw 5 small fixed-wing airplanes, assumed to be military, that came straight toward the UFOs in the sky. And soon, both Australians and Americans in military uniforms arrived by jeeps and cars. That afternoon, Joy Clarke and half a dozen other students were interviewed by Melbourne's local TV Channel 9 about the UFOs in grass circles. And then, to Joy's embarrassment and shock, she was punished with detention for talking to Channel 9 News about the UFOs. Joy's own father worked for the Australian Government Aircraft Factory, also known as GAF. So Joy asked her father about the UFOs and the grass circles that they left. But he would not answer her and told Joy to stop talking about it. And that was the beginning of what is now perceived to have been a deliberate American and Australian government and military cover-up that has never been explained to this day. The local Dandenong newspaper headlined, "Flying Saucer Mystery Deepens. Who were 5 pilots?" meaning the 5 small aircraft that showed up coming toward the UFOs. Quote, "The unidentified flying object reported over the Clayton area on April 6th was almost certainly observed by the pilots of several light aircraft which flew close to and chased the object or objects for a considerable time. Descriptions obtained from eyewitness students at the school and reports of sightings from other nearby locations have confirmed that an object or objects of inexplicable origin have appeared in the sky over this district in the past few weeks," close quote. So that meant UFOs have been seen in the same area repeatedly for weeks, not just on April 6, 1966. The newspaper continued, quote, These facts have been uncovered by journal reporters in their efforts to penetrate the wall of secrecy, which was heavily thrown up after the sighting by students and staff at the Westall School on April 6, 1966, close quote. Remote viewer Buddy Bolton might have an answer about why there would have been persistent UFO activity in those tall grass fields near the Westall High School. But first, I want to share with you what happened to now 69-year-old Joy Clarke and to me on this past Sunday, February 20th, 2022, when I began recording our interview that I was going to schedule for this February 23rd Earthfiles YouTube broadcast. Joy, start unfolding like describing a movie.
Well, I was in science class that morning, and it was just before morning recess. It must have been about 10:15 in the morning, and a student flung the door open and said, Mr. Greenwood, there are flying saucers in the sky outside. We all started to laugh, as you do.
Here is a screenshot of the audio track where the abrupt cutoff occurred in the jagged lines, followed by the steady pattern of phone beeping at the cutoff. That was the first phone cutoff of 4 more, for a total of 5 cutoffs, trying to do the recorded interview with Joy Clarke in Melbourne, Australia.
Now, we all started to laugh because we thought it was funny. And Mr. Greenwood said, well, come on, look, just calm down a bit. Hello?
Joy, why do you think that this would be happening when I spent 90 minutes interviewing with Terry?
No idea. Now, we all started to laugh because we thought that was just silly, and we're sitting there because it was time. I just don't believe this. There was a lot of people yelling and running and all sorts of things.
After that 5th cutoff, we decided to try doing the interview through Joy's cell phone instead of her landline.
Clarke.
All right, let's see how this sounds.
Okay, well, I was in science class. It was around about 10:20 in the morning, coming up to morning recess. A student flung the door open and said to the science teacher, there's discs in the sky, there's flying saucers in the sky. And we all just burst out laughing. Anyway, the science teacher just said, okay, calm down. And then we all walked very quickly down the corridor and out. It was just amazing. I was so excited.
And Joy, if you can now describe in detail color, size, what is it that you're looking at?
I'm looking at discs that look like a cup upside down on a saucer. There were 3 of them. They were silver in colour, moved incredibly fast. I have remembrance of that perhaps one was bigger than the other 2. The other 2 seemed to be further back than the other one. So the bigger one appeared to be sort of closer. In a beautiful, clear blue sky, sunny day, and the way they moved was just amazing. There were a lot of kids running and screaming and yelling. Some were very frightened, some were excited. But I just wanted to absorb all this because it was something that I'd never, ever seen in my life before.
Were you seeing any color in the alternating dark light around the rim of what looks a little bit like a sombrero that Terry illustrated?
Not really. I do recall, though, at the end when they disappeared, the big one took off in the air and turned on the side. And as it turned on the side, the sun hit the bottom of the disc and you got a beam of light that came off the sun, and then they all just disappeared. They were silvery.
Like silver and black alternating around the rim.
Yes. They were up in the sky, and 1 minute they're over to the right, and the next minute they're up in the middle. They came back and across big power pylons and all over the place, and then they disappeared down behind to an area which was called the Grange. It was just like running through the bush. They disappeared down behind the trees, and then they came back up again and they were back in the sky. And then some very small planes came. Now, we were very used to having aeroplanes because we were close to an airport. There was about 5 of them, and they came, and as soon as these planes would get anywhere near them, these discs would just disappear and just move so quickly out of sight. And it was like they were playing a game with them. It was like they were playing cat and mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the plane would get close to the disc, they would hover and then they would disappear. And I mean, this went on for nearly 20 minutes. It was quite incredible. And then when the larger one took off, they all disappeared and then they were gone. And I can remember then too after that, walking around the other side of the school and something caught my eye. And all of a sudden, these jeeps arrived. They were green, they looked like army jeeps. And there were people that got out of them, men in green uniforms, but there were also men in camouflage uniforms. Now, in the 60s, Australian Army wore green and the Americans had camouflage. Australians did not have camouflage uniforms in the 60s, but these were men in camouflage uniforms as well. And they were all standing around talking to each other. So they were there within 20 minutes. And then things started to happen. People started to arrive. We had the principal called a special assembly later that morning, and we were all told not to talk about it and that we hadn't seen anything. And if you did speak about it, you would get into trouble. Behind the principal, you could see these people. They looked like army in the green. There were other uniforms that were blue. There were all men in black suits, and they were all sort of standing in the distance. And they came on and off during the day. And then later that afternoon, Channel 9 had arrived, and myself and about 4 or 5 other kids got interviewed to be on the news that night.
And you were punished with detention because you went on Channel 9 News and told about the UFOs coming?
That's right.
And what was the reaction of your parents and others to such a thing?
What happened after school that night, my elder sister said, look, I know you've seen something. I don't know what it is, but we're going down to have a look. So she took me down. We went just across the road from and we could see these people in the paddock, and they were in uniform, like army people, and some of them had guns, and they were actually digging up bits of the ground and doing all things, and we were crouched down watching through the fence. And she said, come on, we're going to get into trouble, we've got to go.
The Army was digging up where the grass had been put down in a circle by the UFOs?
That's right. There was a big flattened circle. So they were digging, and they had things that looked like Geiger counters or something like that. Anybody that came close were told to get away, and no, you can't come here, you've got to go away. Don't come anywhere near us, you get out of the way, and stay away. A man in a blue uniform, and I assume he was the policeman. Now, he walked up to me and he put his hand on my left shoulder and he said to me, now you stop talking and you go back into the school. And he turned his back on me and he pointed at the cameraman and he said, and you stop filming and you go away.
Wow.
Yeah, so that night, it was definitely on the TV news. Mum and Dad saw it, and I just had explained, what I'd seen and what some of the other kids said to say things of what their experience was. The following day, we got a visit at home from the Victorian UFO Society. They came to the house to speak to my sister and myself. We did not even have a telephone connected to the house. So I have no idea how they got our address. But they came, and there was Paul Norman, who was an American man, and there was a very glamorous blonde lady and another man. Now, they came into our house and interviewed my sister and I at the kitchen table. I had to draw pictures of what I'd witnessed, and Mum and Dad were there with us and my younger brother. And then they came back the next day and they took me down to where one of the circles were and took a photo of me standing in one of the circles. After the event, all that area where the circles were, they'd come in and slashed and burned everything. They told us to stay away from it, not to go anywhere near it.
You have policemen, you've got military people coming. Explain what you think is the most serious intimidation that occurred after April 6, 1966, that showed that the United States military and intel was present in Australia and that they were supervising the suppression of information.
My father was working for government aircraft factories. Now, he used to spend a lot of time out at Avalon, which was an Air Force base down in Melbourne. And he came home, must have been about 4 weeks after the event, and told us that there was to be no more talk of the UFO. End of story. The Army were definitely American.
Did you ever later ask your father, why did you say, don't talk about UFOs anymore?
After that, he wouldn't talk to me about it. We know they weren't earthly. They came from somewhere else. Not to tell us we were stupid children and keep your mouth shut and don't talk about it or else there'll be consequences and bullying. That's not what we want. We just want the truth to come out.
And today in 2022, are you expecting that soon there will be an announcement that we are not alone in this universe?
I hope so. I would be more than overjoyed if that was the case.
I would be overjoyed as well if this whole planet could evolve to truth, real truth, everywhere, about other intelligences in other solar systems throughout the Milky Way galaxy, Andromeda, and beyond. And because I have been so curious about the sombrero-shaped UFOs that were seen and photographed, especially in the 1960s, like the ones over the Westall High School on April 6, 1966, that I asked remote viewer Buddy Bolton if he would take a look at that black and white old photograph of the disc allegedly photographed also in the 1960s and compare it to Joy Clarke's and Terry Peck's illustrations of a similar disc UFO over their Westall High School that seemed to threaten authorities who ordered most everyone to not talk about that UFO event. Well, here now is what Buddy Bolton shared with me this week when he studied Westall.
This was a real event. This is not made up. This is not a misinterpreted event. It was definitely a real craft. This craft came earlier than this first event, and then it returned, and then the second time it came back, which was this Westall incident.
Which was April 6th, 1966.
And then on that date, it left. It was going to stay longer, but there were incoming planes. Inside the craft, there are 3 grays, pseudo-grays. These little guys are 3 feet tall. They have a blue-gray suit that is a plasticized metallic, metallized plastic. And they also are wearing a thick contact lens that literally goes directly onto their eyes. The craft landed on this second visit by the school. One of these grays exited the craft with a container and does something and then is warned that there's incoming craft. This is really unusual. I drew a picture of these containers, and the containers are a kind of a plastic, kind of a glass, but when you squeeze the sides of it, the top opens. These containers had these genetically altered plant-eating insects, and they laid their eggs on the bottom of leaves of different types of varieties of these plants, and they were released. That's why the pseudo-gray was outside the craft. That's why the craft had landed. He was releasing these bugs that were previously collected a few days earlier. I said that they had been there twice and one time before this event. That's what they were doing on this previous event, is they were collecting these bugs. And what I wrote down is genetically altered insects released where they were collected. What they had done to alter them was they have a faster reproduction and more eggs per birth. So they were trying to increase the rate of spread and potency of this bug. Here's why they did it. There is an important microbe, kind of a mold, in the digestive system of this bug. And whenever they poop, it's disseminated into the ground and on plants and other places. And this mold gets to spread pretty quickly. I didn't get to know what that mold does. Pretty mystifying. I don't know if this is something altruistic. I didn't get the feeling that it was like some sort of chemical attack or biological attack on humans.
They are doing something to our environment.
Yes, they are doing it to this bug. Who's to say what they haven't done it with? So who knows what the outcome of this mold microbe is? I would hope it's something positive. To be disseminated in Australia is interesting.
And the fact that they were doing some kind of an insect implantation on Earth means that they were doing something secretly that they didn't want to be seen, they didn't want to be discovered. Can you now go to your description of one of these 3-foot tall grays?
They wouldn't land unless they had to do something on the ground. These pseudo-grays, they're not the typical classic gray with the really skinny neck and the bigger head. These were muscular, although their proportions are a little funny. Their chest size is a little larger and their legs are a little smaller. It kind of reminds me of that film of the alien autopsy. It had like buff legs. Anyway, here's what I wrote down. 1966 Australia, 3 in the first craft, 4 fingers, plugged in waist, and I'll get back to that in a second. A suit that is metals plastic with gloves and shoes. It's kind of like a onesie. The gloves and the shoes are attached all into the one suit. The only thing that's not covered is the head. 2 slits for nose, tiny mouth, no teeth, heart-lung combo. It was a larger organ that was, when they breathe in the air, that is their heart. As they exhale, it's pushing it through the whole body. No genitals. I said it was created by humanoids.
So this would be like some kind of organic cyborg or organic artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's a biological robot, essentially. And then the interesting thing also is this plug on the waist. It has a female plug on its body there, which means there's a hole that goes in. There's something from the craft. When they sit down in one of the chairs, they put that into their waist. And I've seen another class of grays that had this circular, larger plastic thing inside their stomachs. But this is different. It's not related to that.
And it may be that that's how they navigate the craft.
Maybe it goes right into the waist. These are biological robots. They're a combination of different types of technologies.
I wonder if our government knew what was inside of that craft because they knew something about the type and what they were doing, or was it a complete shock to both the Australian and the American governments that something was landing near a school and was leaving these circles in the grass, and that's why it became a top priority of both governments to shut down information?
I got the sense that they were scrambling the craft out of not knowing everything.
It seems almost inevitable for us to find out that other intelligences that interact with our planet and are interested in material resources here and genetic manipulation for centuries, that they would be doing all kinds of experiments around this planet, whether with plants, insects, life forms, humanoids. And I've found that probably one of the more interesting parts of that remote viewing by Buddy, in addition to seeing that there was some kind of a mold from these particular insects that the Greys were collecting, is the round brown apparatus that he could see so clearly that was at the waistband of one of the Grey beings fits into this concept that goes back now for a few decades about the beings in some of the craft being a part of the craft operations. Artificial intelligence in which the skin of the craft, the structure of the craft, the symbols laid over the surfaces of the craft or on the panels where beings put their hands, or perhaps in this case, with these particular type of Greys, they literally plug themselves into the craft. And that the idea of the pilot or pilots and the craft being one operational unit seems to, I think, be emerging more and more as a part of advanced technology with craft, different from us having a pilot that leaves, gets in, and then leaves again. So I found all of this about Westall, what happened with the very heavy duty, everybody keep their mouths shut. Why? And that's what Joy and Teresa and others have asked all the way up to the recent documentaries that have been done in Australia about the Westall UFO phenomena. Why was there such a heavy, strong hand that came down on everyone, that the students were basically, they were insulted as being stupid if they possibly even said that they saw a UFO. And that's got to change on this planet. And I hope that our being able to share this story tonight, that there are other people who may have more information about what happened in Westall, a suburb of Melbourne, Australia, or in other places where perhaps the same kind of strange sombrero hat from one angle and then something deeper from another angle, and the fact that the craft were constantly going horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical. Maybe that was part of their cat and mouse game with the humans that were present. But all of it put together, it has pieces that we have heard in many other different, whether it's military encounters or civilian observations, and that Joy Clarke saying with such fervent feeling, she would be overjoyed if we would all be told the whole truth. So let's cheer for that. Let's cheer for being able to talk about that more in coming months, and hopefully this will be a year where we will have a lot more fundamental breakthroughs on what the truth is, I hope, and that we have almost, Ian said during the recording, that we are only 500 away from breaking through 200,000. So let's think a positive picture, and let's break through that number with the energy of being truth hunters and truth tellers as this revolution to a whole new relationship with our universe continues to roll forward, and that we must sometime soon be told the truth about all the other civilizations we already know about, whereas Space Force are already working with tall whites and Nordics that we learned about last week, and that the more I learn, the more I will share with you. And Ian, the more questions and comments that you will have to ask me during our Wednesday nights. So I turn over to you.
Good evening, Linda. Thank you for that fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
We have a lot of comments. Well, first of all, I have a lot of super chats to get through, so let's go through those first of all.
Thank you.
Moonbird, Kelly, Joseph Anthony, Rod, Green Nightingale, Eric Ackley, Wellman Osorio, Joan 0111, Linda Emeterio, Spinach Chili, United Coalition of Starseeds, Catherine Job, Mark Petrie, Gretchen Casey, Lane 57, Carl Balsamire, Jonas Windridge, Buddha Liam, and Fernando Menendez in Brazil. And let me just say that Brazil has come in at number 5 as the most popular, number 5 in the list of popular geographical locations where Earthfiles is viewed.
And remember, Buddy in the remote viewing last week said that there were 2 or 3 locations off in the waters deep under associated with United States and ET presence, and that Brazil was the other country that had the next most sites.
Well, Brazil is paying attention. As I say, they've now come in at number 5 in the list. And also,
hi everybody.
Interestingly enough, we have Australia at number 4, particularly because we're featuring the Westall event from 1966 tonight.
Good, and ask if anybody who is watching and listening from Australia may have firsthand information, may have been at that Westall school, may have been in the military, may have been in a science organization. If anybody watching has more information, that they can get it to me through email, through ProtonMail, through hard mail, and that's part of the reason to have these dialogues, is people who have been sitting on facts for so long and they are frustrated. Well, we would like to be able to share them here. So, hi, Australia.
Sorry, Linda.
I'm here.
Okay. Sorry, the raid is lashing down here. As I was just telling people in the chat, we had 2 storms last week. We had another storm, Franklin, following hard on the heels on Monday. And today, just now, we've got a lashing storm hitting our windows with rain over here.
Oh my gosh. Well, do the best you can. And if you have to run under something, just tell me.
Okay. First question then, Linda. When did the collaboration between Australia and the US begin? And are they still working together today?
The one significant piece of history between those 2 countries that has always fascinated me is that I understand there is an executive level treaty. I believe that it was either by Eisenhower or JFK, and if people know what I'm talking about here in a second, you can reinforce, but it was around that time. And it was the United States having a treaty for the Pine Gap territory at the center of Australia. And that I have been told, talking with somebody who has worked there, they said that when that treaty was done between the United States and Australia, for the United States to have territorial control of this area of Pine Gap, that our government paid ranchers and farmers within a certain number of miles if you drew a circle around the Pine Gap installation. And we bought up ranchers and farms because we wanted to take out every electricity pole. We wanted to take out any energy making device that could possibly compete or interfere with. They wanted this station of the United States at Pine Gap to have perfectly clean ability to investigate and monitor magnetic fields. Now, that was told to me by a person who worked at Pine Gap. How much is in history books now, or could we ever have presented to us what would have been an executive top secret treaty? It would not be in books. It would not be accessible to the general public. But assuming that that is true, then our very close relationship, it would have certainly started and gelled in World War II. And then it would have come out of all of the crashes that happened in the 40s, into the 50s, and that must have been a bonding time between the Western allies of World War II up against something new, they thought, and now we know it's millennia old, but they thought it was new. What were Foo Fighters? What were these discs? What were the UFOs? So that was the bond, World War II into what do we do? What do we find out about the UFOs? And Australia helped the United States get that facility in Pine Gap. And I believe that it's the National Security Agency, probably with geospatial, that are in control of that operation now, but I don't know for sure what the pecking order is there. I just know we have a very, very important U.S. site at Pine Gap in Australia. Another question?
Okay, Linda, we're getting some messages in from other people who are saying, for example, here's one from Joseph Anthony, who says he knows a rancher who had a cattle mutilation with a strange light in Oklahoma. I've asked him to contact us with more details as well.
And if it was this past year, that would be consistent with a pattern that I am studying. I have talked with ranchers specifically in Kansas and Nebraska in that area, which sounds like that's where this man is. And they had animal mutilations, classic excisions, except one of the anomalies, and the anomalies as they change in all of this are fascinating. I have photographs that I can't put on YouTube because then our channel would be brought down. But I have photographs that were taken by a rancher in the Kansas area only about 5 or 6 months ago now. And it's the keyhole jaw. It's the classic excisions, except on the jaw. I've never seen anything quite like it. Think of, for those of you who are familiar with my work, you know that typically over the last, since the early 1960s at least, whether it was cattle or horses or every domestic animal you can think of, go to wild animals, deer and elk and reindeer and marmots and foxes and rabbits, there are patterns of excisions. And over all these decades, the classic association of the eeriness of animal mutilations is with dry excisions. No flowing blood for the most part, often nothing red, that the skin where the excision has been taken out, like you would take out a plug, the tissue is pale pink, sometimes white. That means that the hemoglobin has been extracted from the capillaries and the arteries and veins. So now what I'm going to describe to you, because I can't in a public forum show you these photos, but I think it's worth describing so that anybody listening in the state that you just brought up, Ian, and this, especially in this Kansas, Nebraska area. If you took Campbell's tomato soup, but don't add water, just think of how that comes out of the can. And then you took some spatula and you took the Campbell's tomato soup undiluted and you just pasted it over the jawbone where the cut is. And so it is a cow with other excisions, but when you look at the head in the photograph, it's as if a red liquid, not running, perfectly dense, is absolutely placed inside of the keyhole excision of upper jaw and lower jaw and the tongue in that animal. I've never seen anything so perfect, meaning it looks almost like a painting, and yet it's some form of hemoglobin. And is it another marker? Is it another signal? I don't know. I have never seen anything like it before 5 or 6 months ago. So that's another one for people to keep their eyes out for. Blood, normally in an animal that is cut, it will run in liquid onto the ground and onto the hair. These are not, that's not happening in these animals at all. So the animal mutilation phenomenon is on this planet. As far as I know from people I have done interviews privately in intel agencies, the government of the United States and other governments knew long ago that the strange, bloodless, trackless animal mutilations were being done by other intelligences in craft. And then the question was why? Was it a negative signal? What was it? Today, in this month of February 2022, I can contribute new information that I've received in the last half year that say the Greys are responsible for many or maybe all of the animal mutilations as the perpetrators. They might be under the control of tall whites or Nordics doing something, but the perpetrators, the actual physical interactors with all of the animals around the world, are in the Grey category. And that the Greys need a very specific, it's either something that is in the chemistry of certain animals or just from Earth life in general, for them to stay healthy and interacting with this planet as they do, that they need some replenishment of these chemicals that they can only get from harvesting tissue and fluid from animals that are indigenous to, live on Earth. So you can put that down as another one of the possible facets of why there are animal mutilations. And I'm glad to hear that somebody is willing to get in touch with me, because another problem is that over the 1960s to 2022, just like Westall, the story, where everybody in authority came down with a heavy fist, don't talk, do not talk, and scared everybody. That was exactly the same approach to law enforcement from military and from intel back in the 60s and the 70s. When I started investigating in September of 1979, there was a famous, by the summer, so I'm fall to summer, there was a famous story that appeared in Penthouse, and it was by somebody obviously doing government bidding, that were trying to blame all of the animal mutilations that were surging then on predators. And they had gone so far as to help the Bentonville, Arkansas Sheriff's Office pull off sort of a trick. And that was, they got night vision. These are established facts that I'm telling you. A cow was purchased from a local Bentonville, Arkansas farmer. It was taken and put on a place where it would be seen by car lights at night. The animal had certain cuts in it, and the Bentonville Sheriff's Office ran their night vision equipment in collaboration with whoever was in charge of this operation. And they either went and got crows, because I think it was crows. It was a carrion gathering bird. Was introduced to the scene in the Starscope. And the headlines that came out of Bentonville was, this proves animal mutilations are done by birds like crows and hawks. And that was picked up and it was reported in Penthouse as an explanation for animal mutilations. And for those of us who knew real facts, it was laughable. It was an insult to intelligence. I remember this was specifically the period of what would have been around 1980, 81, somewhere in there. Jump all of the way to my later living in Philadelphia, and I believe that this was a phone call to me somewhere around 2002 or 3 to my office in Philadelphia. And I recognized the name of the man calling, going all the way back to those days, those early 1980s, about veterinarians who were actually doing real investigations versus the Penthouse report that was put out there like a clobber, that everybody go away, there's nothing to see in animal mutilations, it's just birds. The voice that called my office in Philadelphia said, my name is Dr. And it was a whole name that I had been given when I was still in Colorado as a veterinarian who was doing the real work for the Bentonville Sheriff's Office. But he would not go public. He would not contradict the strange policy of birds that the sheriff was giving out. And now I'm hearing this veterinarian say, I am doctor. And he said, I've wanted to talk with you for a long time, Linda, because you are one of the only people who has actually been telling the truth about the animal mutilations. And I want you to hear from me firsthand. I've retired, but I want you to know that the very same time that the Bentonville County Sheriff's Office in Arkansas put out the story of the star scope, he said, they brought me animals privately. And during that same period when they were putting out the star scope and the birds, he said, I was doing autopsies secretly in my veterinarian office on cattle that were mutilated, that were being brought to me by the Bentonville Sheriff's Office. And he said, no surgery on the outside, as you have reported about the missing hearts, and that the pericardium would be collapsed in the chest with no tears. He said, I was opening up some of the mutilated animals in Bentonville County, and that he went through. I have documented, photographed, missing esophagus, missing bladder, missing kidney or kidneys. And he went through on the phone of different organs. This is opening up the animal with no surgery on the surface of the animal and finding clean, bloodless, no fluid flowing, but whole organs missing from inside the bodies of the cattle in the Bentonville area, that this veterinarian was documenting for the same sheriff who was telling the world that they had run a star scope and the answer was birds. Why can't we just reach a point where all of the facts and all of the truths are just laid out, and that we discover that we're not alone in the universe, and that it is teeming with life forms, and that just like on Earth, there are friendlies, there are neutrals, and there are hostiles. And that some life forms in the Milky Way galaxy may be desperate for something that keeps them alive. And maybe Earth is a garden, a true garden, and a lot of life depends on a lot of things from Earth. The veterinarian said, I have seen, Linda, things that are so impossible biologically, that just like the doctor in Denver in your first documentary, A Strange Harvest, I'd already done another documentary by then that he had seen, who said that the photographs, the Polaroids from Sheriff Tex Graves and others, showed that there were, and with documentation, that there were missing hearts, that doctor in Rose Medical Center had said, this is the kind of advanced technology, maybe 50 to 100 years in the future, from 79, where we will be doing molecular surgery based on frequencies. And we've mentioned this before. And that the frequency, the molecular extraction, is what the veterinarian in Arkansas, he too was describing that he couldn't understand how else what he was finding under necropsy could occur. So I hope that what I've said to you all tonight can translate to a greater comfort zone for those of you who are veterinarians, who are ranchers, who do find animals with extremely strange excisions in which there's no blood. Totally opposite of the tomato can I've said is one case that I'm very interested whether it repeats again in 2022. All the others, there's no blood and most of the tissue is pale. If people would be comfortable, would become more comfortable in just telling the facts as the facts are noted and documented, we'd learn a lot more. And that's what I'm hoping that my Earthfiles YouTube channel will continue to give us space, so that even if you have to remain anonymous, but you can send me documents, photographs from investigations in animal mutilations, human abductions, what the government is doing on a variety of sophisticated advanced technologies, then I can interface with all of you. That's always been my goal for Earthfiles YouTube channel. And Ian, I'll take one more quickly, but I'm really glad I got to go into that one deeply. Thank you.
Okay, so just leading to the last question. We have Blair Ford says, I live near Westall and I can tell you UFOs are still flying around here. And the last question I wanted to get to is, Linda, how many ET species do you think the Aboriginals, First Nation from Australia had contact with in their history?
I don't know how many they had in their history, but I know right now that I have been told that there are at least 168 known different civilizations at our end where we are in the Milky Way galaxy. And on Westall, for those of you who live in that Clayton suburb and know Westall, that is now a community college, and if you are seeing what are, to you, are unidentified aerial craft, let me know. Try to get good cell phone footage on a tripod. We all need to use tripods. We all need to have steady, rock solid, where the camera's not moving, so any movement in the video is whatever the object is. If everybody could start trying to actually, like zoologists, will go out and they make like a pattern that they're going to document X animal, that there really is a reason to have good equipment and tripods and try to document what might be happening in the sky, day, night, morning, evening. And if you could get some good video in Westall of something that I can run by the image analysts that I go to try to separate the wheat from the chaff in the thousands of videos it seems that people are taking now, that maybe we are in a year where there will be more and more UFO activity because maybe the intelligence or intelligences are trying to condition all of Earth now more and more to their presence in whatever way they are. And this might be a really excellent year to get good, solid tripod footage. And if you all in Westall could send me what you think are your best photos and your good videos, we could start a dialogue that just keeps on going through the Earthfiles YouTube channel, program after program. If you all actually are having repeatable interactions in the sky, on the ground, let's have a Westall reporter to Earthfiles YouTube channel. And we'll do a dialogue about what's happening there, because it's fascinating. Westall is a suburb of Melbourne, which is on the Southern Ocean, that is in that huge, it's not a bay, it's a big circular part of the Southern Ocean that comes up. And we know that extraterrestrial biological entities, according to the CIA, NSA, DIA, and on, the tall blondes and the tall whites, they love to be underneath the basins of oceans and seas. So where there are large watery areas like Melbourne, it just makes sense that there would be more activity in that area, especially if the non-humans are now going to be more visible because we're in some kind of a transition now, finally, from the old, no, we're the only intelligence in the universe, to strike that. It's teeming with life. The universe itself is conscious. We are a beautiful species if we understood that we are a creation through other intelligent manipulation of DNA, and that we somehow ended up with very strong souls and strong links to this universe that itself is conscious. We have been denied those truths. Maybe the whole planet, including Putin, would change if the whole paradigm shifted. We're not alone. And there are a lot of intelligences that seem to have vested interests in this planet and great interest in this species of Homo sapiens sapien. Are we going to survive ourselves? And if we aren't, are they going to intervene to help us survive? And if there is a law against that, what happens on Earth? I love you guys. I love everything you send, and a big hug. And I look forward next week to bringing you, I think, a very, very interesting new report. See you next Wednesday.
Turn on closed captions for YouTube videos by clicking the white CC button on the lower right. The default language for Linda's videos is English. If you would like to see the captions in another language, click on the white settings button next to the CC button. Select Subtitles CC, and then select Auto Translate. Select a language, and the captions will now appear in that language.
Sort of gone through, and they will hold their heads. I never had a cat do that before. And they'll pull against the comb, helping me get out snarls. And I think it's the best they've ever been.